of Heritage for the government of Newfoundland and Labrador. Also, the Executive Director of the Heritage Foundation of Newfoundland and Labrador. So we have lots to talk about, and it's my pleasure to welcome Mr. Jerry Dick to the program.
Hi, Karl.
Welcome, Jerry.
Thank you.
Did you have a passion for history when you were a little kid?
Yeah, I think it's something that's always been with me, and particularly I think getting the stories from my grandparents. My grandparents all immigrated from Europe, and well, they came out of Soviet Union, so there were lots of stories there. So I think I just got that fascination, and in grade 12 I did we had to do a family history tree, and that got me started on that, and I've already done a couple of books on my family's history, so it's something that's been with me a long time.
Yeah, that can keep you busy for a long time. Family
30
history.
years, I think. I was at it for 30 years.
You were born and bred in Southern Ontario? Mm-hmm. Rural Southern Ontario. Tell us about where you grew up.
That's right. Well, I grew up really pretty much the very southern tip of Ontario, near a place called Leamington, and I grew up. I'm a farm boy. Mm-hmm. I grew up on we had peach orchards and greenhouses. So yeah, never thought that I'd be spending most of my adult life in Newfoundland and Labrador.
On the rugged coast of Canada.
Yeah.
That's very interesting. So, how did you end up in 1985 getting on a plane and coming to Newfoundland?
Well, I was working with well, it's now called the National Trust. It was the Heritage Canada Foundation, and they had done a pilot on a program called Main Street, and so I was working with them in terms of developing some educational materials and researching some of the pilots, and so they were about to develop the main program. And I knew that Carbonear was being considered. So in advance of actually coming here, I remember one rainy, foggy May showing up here and going out to Carbonear. So I came here for work. I guess many people go in the other direction or have gone in the other direction, but I came out here to coordinate what was to be a 3-year program in heritage preservation and downtown revitalization in the town of Carbonear, and well, that's went into about 35 years of being here.
And while you were doing that, you were also doing your master's at MUN, weren't you?
The master's came much later.
Oh, I
Actually,
see.
When I was working with the provincial government, I decided to do a master's, and
that was in cultural geography.
Cultural geography, yes.
What exactly is that?
I guess you could say cultural geography is about studying how people inhabit place. So it looks at how they think about place and their customs and how they build things and all that. So it was a really good field for me to kind of have another more critical look at the work that I was doing in heritage preservation. And cultural geographers can look at anything and everything in terms of how they understand place. Mm-hmm. So when I did my thesis, I looked at how bureaucrats, I was looking at, it was called Constructing the Newfoundland Outport, and I wanted to know how people construct it, how bureaucrats did, how writers did, historians, and people today in places. How are they thinking about their place and what's going on? Mm-hmm. So that was a great thing to be able to do much later in my career.
Yeah. So getting back to when you first arrived here, what were your impressions of Newfoundland? It was far cry from the peach orchards and greenhouses of Southern Ontario.
Well, I remember my first thought about Carbonear. I went down the main street and I could see, things were in pretty rough shape, and I thought, oh, they need me, like in terms of, I think my first impressions were, how wonderful the people were, and there's something about the landscape that's always agreed with me here. Mm-hmm. This kind of elemental landscape that I like and I'm really comfortable with. Yeah, I thought I would be here for 3 years, and then I was thinking maybe I'd go off and do something with QSO, but I stuck around, and that led to a really interesting career here in this province.
And now the Main Street program in Carbonear. How did that work out? Were you happy with the results there?
Well, we had some considerable success. Like we took the vacancy rate from about 45% down to about 15%. And really the Main Street program was about kind of reanimating a downtown. You know, Carbonear was a classic case. The mall sits up on the edge of town and the businesses close down and people don't invest in their properties. So it was really about kind of reanimating the community. So I thought we had some initial success. And then when the program was over and the funding was done, then, you know, the effort just kind of fell by the wayside and things seemed to slide back for a long time. But I don't know if you've been in Carbonear recently, but it seems like there's some stuff happening again.
I think so, yeah.
People, you know, starting up new businesses and whatnot. So,
yeah.
And they've done some, well, we had planned for this maybe 30 years ago, and now they're finally doing some beautification in the downtown area. So, you know, sometimes it's just a matter of when the time is right for something.
You've been involved in a very personal project for quite a while. You've been restoring your own church, haven't you?
Well,
tell us about that.
Yeah, well, I've had actually a few projects. My first major project was to restore an 1826 house in Harbor Grace, which I subsequently ran as a Heritage Inn. That was, and that house was empty for 20 years, so it was in pretty rough shape.
Wow.
And then about 12 years ago, a friend and I bought an old church out in Trinity Bay. A United Church had been closed down, and there was some concern it was going to be torn down. And I thought, well, you know, why not get a church? So that's been an ongoing project. It's a summer place. It's a little church sitting on a rocky knoll overlooking the ocean, and it's one of those projects that it's really never done. Things that I did 10 years ago need redoing, and the windows, you know, always need repair and whatnot. But it's been a fun project.
Sounds like fun. Jerry, sticking with buildings, there've been a lot of what I would term significant buildings here in St. John's that over the years have been torn down, destroyed in one way or another. There are some left. I was wondering which, for you, are the most significant buildings that we have left now?
Well, I would certainly say this is true of St. John's and you know, all communities are historic churches, and you know, we all know what's going on. I mean, the rural populations are declining, and so they're closing churches left and right. So, you know, I'm quite concerned about these. In St. John's, probably most particularly the commercial core. When I was with Heritage NL, we rebranded from the Heritage Foundation. One of our staff did a map showing all the commercial buildings that had been lost probably since the 1960s or 70s. And it's getting close to half. So every time we remove another downtown, you know, historic commercial building, we start to really ebb away at that special fabric and sense of place.
Yeah. When you mentioned the word fabric, I know you've talked about the historic fabric of the downtown of St. John's and your fear that you know, it's in jeopardy. Can you just elaborate a little bit more about your feelings on that?
Yeah, well, as I say, you know, we've seen a lot. You know, it's one building at a time that gets torn down, and so one of my concerns, or my biggest concern over the last couple of years has been kind of the western end of Water Street. Our office was located at Springdale and Water in an 1870s building, so you know, there have been pretty well everything around us has been torn down now. There's just kind of a little island of heritage buildings on that corner. And often, I mean, we can't save everything, I appreciate that. And I think one of my concerns is that, well, what is so special about these buildings? I think it has a certain scale, it has a certain texture or pattern of buildings that make it downtown St. John's. And so what I'm often concerned about with newer development, and I'm all for good new development, is that the scale is wrong. And it's kind of overwhelming. And also, you know, if we look at the downtown streets, even the little side streets that went to Harbor Drive, there's a shop or there was something that addressed the street. And a lot of our newer buildings now they give nothing to the street at all. And so it's not going to be a very nice place to walk. And I'm thinking, for example, the new addition to the Jag Hotel, you know, that's going to be almost a whole block and really nothing on Water Street other than sort of faux windows. I think of the new Salvation Army building right at street level. It's just a blank wall. So I think we have to, you know, when we're doing new development, we should really look at what was there before, or what's there in the neighborhood now, and try and really preserve that kind of special scale and sense of place.
You talked a while ago about how we shouldn't be building things that give a false sense of history. What did you mean by that? Yeah,
sometimes the approach is to, when you're building in a historic district, is, well, it has to look like everything else, or it has to look like it's been there 100 years. And I don't believe that that's necessarily appropriate. There may be special instances where that is, but I would say, you know, buildings are of a particular time and place, and so they need to speak to that. But again, that the design of new buildings is very respects what was there before, what is there now.
Yeah. Let's get back to rural Newfoundland.
Yeah.
Not too long after you moved here, the unthinkable happened. The fishery was shut down and the cod moratorium was imposed. Do you think the fact that so many people were thrown out of work and we had to figure out ways of employing people and bolstering the economy made people focus on heritage development as the economic development of heritage as a way of alleviating our problems?
There definitely was some of that. And it was all, you know, a lot of it was tied to tourism development. We'll try and diversify our economies to include tourism. And also, but I think there was also a sense of, by a lot of people, that we're going to lose something, that special, and I was in Carbonear, I just caught the tail end of the inshore fishery and people still going to the Labrador coast, the stationers, and that all ended. And so I think people felt that something was being lost. And so we saw, I think, about a tripling of the number of community museums, which may have been part, you know, thinking about economic and development and tourism, but I think it was also about people preserving their kind of special, their past and their way of life.
Do you think some communities kind of rushed into things, rushed into, you know, heritage development without doing the proper planning and giving it the kind of thought that should have been given? I'm
smiling because that's always been my mantra, is planning. You know, you have to do your planning. And I remember working with one community, I won't name them, but we took them to Bonavista to show them the work that had been done there. And I said, well, you know, the two kind of lessons here are leadership and planning, because Bonavista had a long-term plan that they're still working towards. And the response was, well, yeah, we can do a plan later, but we just want to do some stuff now. And probably a classic case of doing something without a plan. In one community, they had built a building for a museum, but they didn't have a set of plans or anything. They nearly had to tear it down because it was built too close to the road. And I was asked to come in and do a set of plans to help them figure out how they would actually design the interior of this building. So, you know, I think there's often this anxiousness to, we want to do something, we want to see some quick results, where, you know, this kind of heritage work is really community development, and it's long term, that you do your planning and you do a number of incremental things, and you'll see the results maybe 5, 10, 15 years down the road.
What is it about Bonavista that you like so much? Because you think they've done an absolutely fantastic job in Bonavista.
Yeah, well, there's a community that, so they were hard hit by the moratorium.
Oh, yeah.
And so a number of people left, and council's first response was, well, these vacant buildings are going to make our community look bad. We have to get them torn down. And it really was the local Heritage Society said, no, you know, those are part of our future. So the Bonavista Vista Historic Townscape Foundation, they really laid the groundwork. So they did a long-term development plan. They had a grant program for owners of residential properties to fix up their houses, to restore them. And they did a lot of the beautification. They did the whole Church Street revitalization, beautification, and a lot of stuff along the harbor front. So, you know, as I say, I think they had a couple of those key ingredients. They had real leadership. You know, Dave Bradley and his father, Gordon Bradley, were real. Yeah. Yeah, and Dave still are real, you know, strong leaders there. And gradually, you know, not everybody saw the benefit of it, but gradually brought the community on board. And now, I mean, I don't think anybody can argue that what the heritage work they've done has really, it's been a boon for the community.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
It really put it on the map.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know anytime I've been there in the summertime, there's been just crowds of people there.
Yeah.
Great vacation spot now for people.
I just want to stop, if I can, at just one example, because the temptation is to always look at tourism, but one of the projects that I think was really key in Bonavista was restoring the old Garrick Theatre.
Yes.
And that was not done for the tourists, that was done for the locals. And so I think if you want to keep people there and attract, especially young people, you have to have stuff to do. And so that, you know, they have live performance, they have movies. So I think a venue like that is really, really important.
For sure. When you were director of heritage for the Newfoundland and Labrador government, part of your responsibility, I guess, was developing policy. Mm-hmm. What were some of your main goals in terms of policy development, and how easy was it for you to convince your masters in government that they should, you know, follow your line?
Well, one of the pieces that we did quite a bit of work, and I feel quite proud of, is in terms of support for museums. I mean, we managed to get some additional funding, but we also thought it was important that community museums, you know, that they're properly managed, that they're looking after their collections properly. So we kind of tied funding to kind of adhering to some of those best practices in museum management. So that was one policy piece that I was involved with.
Are there things about St. John's that you would like to see changed or developed, you know, that may never happen, but that you'd like to see happen?
Well, I guess I would like to see, you know, as much of the heritage fabric as exists in St. John's preserved. I think in terms of the waterfront, there's maybe a bit of a missed opportunity there. You know, I've now
moved. Now, speaking about the waterfront, one of the things that's always bothered me is that you talk about a false sense of history. Well, there's kind of like no sense of history in some ways with the waterfront, because we have, you know, chain restaurants on the waterfront, you know, which never ever made any sense to me. But then it was explained, well, the Port Authority, the federal government, has control over the harbor, and, you know, that's their doing. It has nothing to do with City Council or the government of Newfoundland and Labrador. I don't know whether that's a cop-out or not, but what's your take on that?
Yeah, I don't know either. I mean, I'd be interested in how other cities handle it. I mean, how does the old Port of Montreal handle it? You know,
or Halifax,
they seem to be quite dynamic places, and you know, pretty cool scene there on their waterfronts. I think a real missed opportunity is the other side of Harbor Drive.
Yeah.
Because those are the backs of Water Street, and there's virtually, it's all parking now.
Yeah.
And you know, that would seem to me prime.
But people don't really seem to get worked up about this issue here, except for, you know, the harbor fence. That generated some protest.
Yeah.
But apart from that, I don't really recall anybody ever being terribly worked up about, you know,
Well,
the harbor
yeah.
as a heritage.
Yeah, I think, as I
Property.
say, I think it's just a missed opportunity. You know, there are sections of it where you see the backs of the old Water Street buildings, and it's
Yeah.
kind of cool. You know, the odd business person has tried to do something with it. Oh, geez, maybe 15, 20 years ago, the Provincial Architectural Association had a planning charrette where they brought a bunch of people together, and we actually did some brainstorming and got ideas down on paper for how we could strengthen the whole harbor area. But you know, that just seemed a fun exercise, and nothing really came of it.
Have you ever done any surveys and asked Newfoundlanders and Labradorians what they think of heritage development, our heritage and culture?
I'm trying to remember now. I think there was actually a national survey that looked at it by province, and generally it seemed to be pretty high. You know, that people were interested. But you know, it often seems like it comes down to, I think, a false dichotomy of preserving heritage and economic development, and I think the two really can go hand in hand.
Yeah. The Colonial Building. You were involved with the restoration of the Colonial Building and the properties surrounding it. Did that turn out the way you wanted it to turn out?
Well, I feel pretty good about the restoration of the exterior of the building, and that was really my major involvement. I was, for the first several years, I was chair of the project management committee. And we had a lot of decisions to make in terms of how we're going to approach this, and we decided to restore the exterior of the building to its original condition. And when we looked at those original plans and the old photos, we realized that we had lost, you know, through various changes, we had lost some very special things about that building. And, you know, I often describe it as a big, small building. Mm-hmm. It's quite impressive. They were going to get the biggest bang for the buck, but they didn't have a lot of money, and it wasn't a huge building. So I feel, quite good about the decisions we made around restoring that building to its original design intent. And I guess I haven't been involved then for, since I was involved with the Heritage Foundation, I really wasn't involved with that project. So I know it's been kind of going more slowly than people would like, but my understanding is the plan is to restore a number of the interior spaces. Our plan had been to develop an interpretation of the political history and development of the province, and we did have significant funding, and then that funding got lost in the budget, one of the budget processes. So I'm really not sure. I think there are still some plans to do that, but it's probably taken longer than we had all hoped. But
there was a little bit of blowback about how the yard, for want of a better word, in front of the building was changed so dramatically, because they used to have the fountain and all of that. Do you recall that?
Oh yes.
Yeah.
Oh yes. And there were people who had that kind of sense of attachment to the fountain. That was built during the Smallwood years, I guess in the 60s probably. But we also got quite a bit of pushback on removing a number of trees there. But the way the building, so when they put in the fountain, they had to level it. Originally it had just a gradual incline up to the building. And it gave you a special sense of approach to a very special building.
That's right.
And so they doubled the number of stairs and flattened it all out. And I guess they didn't call it ocean spray across for nothing, right? Because or fountain spray.
Fountain spray, yeah.
Because it all went over across the road. So, and even part of the removal of the trees, it was really to restore that, that view of the front of the building from the street. Yeah. And there was concern that the ones close to the building were probably undermining the building and so forth. So,
but I mean, they've really restored the history of the property, because, I was thinking, I can stand there now and I can much better imagine the riot that took place in front of that building back in Squire's time, you know, when they wanted to deter from and the government out. You can see the police on horses and all the crowds, protesting. Whereas it wasn't quite as easy when you had the fountain, and then they used the fountain as a big planter, and there were flowers growing in it.
And when we were doing that project, we had a number of experts come in from outside the province, and I came to learn what a special building it is. Like inside there were beautiful faux paint finishes, and we had a firm from New York come out and do some of that work and help us to understand the finishes that were there. And they said it was as fine a building as anywhere in North America at that time in terms of those interior finishes. They couldn't afford the marble, so they did a faux dark green Venetian marble in the lobby, which I understand will be restored.
Jerry, it's been fun talking to you. I've learned a lot, very interesting chat, and you're retired now, and I want to wish you all the best in your retirement years.
Thanks very much, Karl.
Thank you very much for the contribution you've made to Newfoundland and Labrador heritage and culture. And that's it for this edition of Karl Wells' Point to Point. Thank you for watching. We'll see you again next time.
If you want convenience, Marie's Mini Mart is here for you. A one-stop shop for a variety of products, home-style breads, sandwiches, plus check out our freshly baked artisan breads and single-serve desserts exclusively at our in-store bakery on Frecker Drive. With 25 locations, wherever you go, there we are.
If you have a comment about this program, we'd love to hear it. Email or call us, or send us your feedback through social media.
Canada's Drag Race is back, baby. 12 Canuck queens are on the hunt to snatch that crown.
So beautiful.
I love this.
So polish those claws.